All right, everybody. I'm here. I finally fixed my internet. Hopefully no one's distracted by the NFL draft. But if you guys are ready, I'll give it another minute for people to join, and we'll start here in about a minute. I do have the chat up and the Moodle, if that works for you guys. I also will be monitoring the comments on the discussion page on the YouTube channel. So either place is good with me. So I'll give a few more minutes for people to sign in here. Start screen share. All right, so then I can hop around on the internet here and show you a few things after we get started. So I'll give everybody about another minute or so to hop in. It looks like we only have 8 people, but you could all be in big groups. So 8 people here. Oh, 7. Oh no. All right, give it another minute or so. All right, it looks like we're up to 9 viewers. People are connecting as we speak. That is good. If while we're waiting, you want to head over to the Moodle, there's a few resources I'll want to show you. Got more people hopping in on the Moodle chat. Either place is fine with me. Apparently when I minimize, the screen share goes away. That's awesome. Let me fix that. There we go. All right, more people are signing in. So if you will, either in the discussion section or on the chat on the Moodle, whichever is easier for you, I've got both up. If you will check in by signing your name so I'll know who is here. I guess if you're in the Moodle, I can see your name when you log in, but if you got somebody else visiting with you, type that as well. I'll do this both at the beginning and the end of the session today. Hop over, refresh. Okay. All right, well, seeing as it's 7:08, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and everybody else will just have to catch up in a little bit. So on the Moodle, I added a few things today. Pull this up. Okay, so here's all of your documents like we talked about before from the lady from Frisco. Then there was another lady from Frisco that I met a while ago, and she has, I'm sure it's not the best quality, but this is a chart, kind of a, I don't know, quick reference guide and there's two parts to it. So it kind of gives you a quick overview. So that's now up there. So that's the early histories part 1. Part 2 is the second half. And then this one is kind of helpful, I think, thematic timelines. If you're looking at specific topics, this is really good for synthesizing information for essays. So if you had an essay, for example, with this one, Native American interaction with Europeans or something, or in, I don't know, since 1800. Here kind of gives you an overview of a topic. So there's several things. Here's slavery, migration, religion. A lot of these things are really good for essays, like I was saying. So political parties, reform movements, which today we're going to talk a little bit about antebellum culture and society. So this is where you can kind of find a lot of this. Here's your antebellum till here. And then more reform movements, and this is progressive, which you guys wanted to talk about as well. So there's that quick reference. Civil rights, women, economics. That's going to be really helpful because you may get an economics question, and sometimes we forget about a lot of the economic things that change. Good thing to note, wars always have an economic component. So you can always bring up the cost of war, both financially and the cost of lives, resources, rationing, all that kind of good stuff. So I think this is a really helpful, and I'm probably making people nauseous by doing this, but check this page out when you're studying, because it is a really nice reference for synthesizing big themes. And then this one is somebody's review sheet from somewhere that I got. Again, this is kind of summarizing the history, but at the end, it has same kind of thematic overview of certain things. So if you're prepping for essays and you want to kind of bring ideas together, and if the multiple choice kind of does a good job of how did this affect this, you can kind of piece those topics together. So there's that for you. The other thing, there was a question last time that I didn't get around to answering, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. Let me switch off. Somebody asked me both about what multiple choice questions would be covered by which topics, and also talked about, or the question was asked about essays and how essays are broken down. So really quickly, I think this is the screen share now. Yeah, okay. So let me do this to make it big. Okay, so essays. I don't know if you can see that. I hope so. It's kind of small, but you have good eyes. Okay, essays are broken up into essentially 5 time periods. You have 1491, oops, which of course is the year before Columbus sailed, right, to 1789. And of course the key fact there is the official beginning of the United States, Washington's elected, all that good stuff. So that's essay time period number 1. The second time period is 1789 to 1865. The next one, 1865 to 1914, which essentially covers your Gilded Age Progressive era up until World War I. Then the next one is World War I to World War II, which is 1914 to 1945. And the last one is 1945 to 1980. Okay. So, essentially, if you remember, each essay topic will be covered at some point on the AP exam. Let me see if there are any questions. I said I had 5 more comments. So essentially, with your essays, if the DBQ, which would be tough, if the DBQ is about, let's say, the leading to the revolution and all of the acts, Stamp Act, Sugar Act, all of those good things. So leading to the revolution. So this is your DBQ. Then the first 2 essays that you will choose from will be from those the second 2 time periods. And then the final 2 essays will be from these last 2 time periods. And likewise, if the DBQ falls here, then the first essay choices for your FRQs will be these 2 years, and then the second 2 FRQs will be from 65 to 1914, and then the 1945 to 1980. You shouldn't expect to have any essays that deal with the 90s or the present. That doesn't mean you can't bring in information if it helps your argument. By all means, bring in the information, but you don't need to focus as much on that sort of thing. So that was a question that I saw after we signed out last time, and I wanted to make sure that I addressed it. Okay. Are there any other questions? How come this doesn't want to refresh? All comments 55. Newest first. How about this? Okay. People signing in. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, perfect. Okay, then there are no questions there. Let me pull this up. Okay, awesome. So today we were going to cover antebellum culture, and we were going to cover progressives. And we can also cover anything else you want to do. I know a lot of you will be out tomorrow. If I were to have you in class, you're out AP testing, but I can also answer questions for those of you who will be in class tomorrow if you need. And I guess kind of an on-demand, whatever it is that you can think of. So let's start with antebellum culture and antebellum America. And the first thing that you really need to know about antebellum America is, it's here. So antebellum America, the key word here is America. And the reason I say that is this is the first time we are going to see a truly American culture. So this is post-War of 1812, and we're no longer seen as a British colony. We've, shown the British twice that we can be independent, and so now America is coming into its own. So this is antebellum American culture, uniquely our own. Economically, so if we're looking political, social, economic here, economically the big thing is the American system, and this is our great compromiser, Henry Clay. Hopefully you all yelled that out at the computer here. So American system set up by Henry Clay. If you remember, this had the first big protective tariff. There we go. Protective tariff also supported canals and the National Highway. And if you remember when we did this in class, we looked at the American system and how it affected everyone, each region of the United States. And because this was the era of good feelings, most people assumed, oh, everything is all well and good, everybody loves each other. But if you remember, the protective tariff, of course, is going to be favorable to the North because they're the manufacturers. People in the South are agricultural people. The canals and highways that were paid for by the federal government, again, that's connecting the North and the West. And so as we talked about, the South felt kind of shafted, and that begins the divide and the sectionalism that will be very apparent when we hit the Civil War. And of course, in between then, you have more tariffs, which make the South really upset because they're the ones mostly buying the imported goods, and it's also creating a disincentive for the people in Europe to buy the raw material from the South. And so it's decreasing the trade in America for international things. What else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, the new tariff abominations, and then nullification crisis. So if you remember that nice cartoon we had that we watched, it was, terrifying. Yeah, bad jokes. And it's really tough when nobody laughs because I'm here by myself. Okay, so that's the economic component of antebellum America. When we talk about culture, you guys, I think, know this very, very well, but this is a time of reform. America doesn't have to worry about enemies. It's kind of got sure footing politically. that we don't have a lot to fear and to protect ourselves from, so we can begin to explore our art interests, and then of course economically what we have going on. So culturally, we have first American literature. So things like, I was talking about Moby Dick, Irving, so Herman Melville's author, your Transcendentalist. See if I can spell it. Good, no red lines there. So transcendental poetry, your Thoreau's, Emerson's, and essentially, yeah, you can focus on what transcendentalism is and about nature and blah, 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 but essentially what you need to know is that it's American. It's something uniquely American, and that's kind of why this period is so important. So that's kind of literature component. We also have lots of reforms. Asylum and prison. And the name of the day there is Dorothy Dix. Apparently I can't spell. Okay, look at the options. I'm pretty sure that's... No, that's not how you spell it. Well, you know who I'm talking about. So asylum and prison reform. Dorothy Dix, essentially seeing that mental patients in prison, so people with mental disabilities in prison, were treated very harshly, were not treated for kind of bettering their life. So she decided to push for the creation of asylums where people can go and receive the treatment they need and not be caged as animals, essentially, in prisons. So that's asylum and prison reform. Education reform, and the key guy there is Horace Mann. I'm just pulling all this stuff from my brain here. So Horace Mann decides to lead the charge. He begins at New England, where most, remember, colonial time, education was really, really important. Small towns, easy to send kids to schools as opposed to the South. So education reform started in New England and then spread elsewhere. Better curriculum, better pay for teachers, more hours for school, so the kids would be well educated. Because of course, the most important thing about education is that it leads to a better democracy, that the students are well educated, that they might contribute better to the country. That's the nice idealistic thing. That was the other thing they talked about, is people paying taxes for public education. And oh, why should I pay taxes for public education? It's important to have tax-supported public education, because otherwise the children will go crazy and be on the streets and, you know, get into trouble and all that stuff. So even though, you know, people didn't necessarily have kids in schools, it would affect them down the line if they weren't educated. So that was one argument for having all of these improvements to schools, which of course costs money, just like it does today. Okay, so that's education reform. We also see temperance. And the big reason for temperance was a lot of men drinking, working, drinking, coming home, and affecting the family life. So most of the people involved in wanting this temperance are going to be the women who are at home. This is the same time as we start to see, well, continue to see the Republican motherhood. This idea that women should stay home and take care of the kids, and that's great, except when the husbands would come home and not treat them well. So temperance is a lessening of alcohol. They didn't necessarily call for complete prohibition, although I'm sure that wouldn't have been turned down if it had been proposed. So that was kind of a big movement. Nothing official, no big laws passed, but definitely a great sentiment where women kind of stood up for their rights, which also leads me to women's suffrage. And I can type just like I read on the board. There we go, suffrage. Okay, women's suffrage doesn't obviously occur at the time, but the beginnings of talking about women in a political role is important. Abigail Adams was a big supporter of women's involvement in politics and education. Back, you know, in the second president of the United States, it just took us a really long time to get, everybody to believe that we could, be educated, be voters, etc. No soapboxes here. Okay, so anyway, women's suffrage. We have Seneca Falls, and the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments. So that was their big deal. Kind of redrafting the Declaration of Independence, including women, that, we should have the right to vote, rah, rah, rah. Just wait till 1920. Okay, so women's suffrage. We also see kind of the thing that set a lot of these other things off is going to be the Second Great Awakening. And this is going to challenge people's morals. Okay, what do you want to do with your life? How are you going to make the world better? That's where we start to see the reforms, helping people in the prison, helping people become educated, being concerned with others. And of course, to be able to have the time to think about all of, these reforms, you have to have some kind of political stability, which was afforded to the country because they won the War of 1812. And not all of, but most of the Latin American countries also gaining independence at this point. You're losing the influence of these big European powers, which gives these small new republics some room to breathe. So all of these things happen. Second Great Awakening, again, we see lots of women being involved, and all of these things are going to be connected. So hopefully, if you got something to write about that, that's great. Another thing that's kind of a reform, I don't even want to call it a reform. Let's just call it part of culture. It's going to be your, why can I not think, utopian societies. So your Shakers, Brook Farms, right, if I remember all that stuff, and Oneidas. And of course the Shakers didn't believe in procreation, so they had to recruit people until they all died away and don't exist anymore. But these societies were trying to achieve a perfect quality of life, perfect lifestyle, communal life, all that good stuff. Of course, you can't really ever achieve utopia. Sorry to be negative, but there it is. Utopian societies. I'm trying to think of other cultural things. If I think of something, I'll head back to it. I wanted to link in the political to the cultural here. This is going to be the rise of the common man. And that is important because when you think about the Second Great Awakening, yes, it's a religious movement. Yes, it goes through the United States. It's something everybody goes through just like the First Great Awakening. So it's unifying in a sense because everybody experiences it, not that everybody joins the same churches or what have you. But it's encouraging people to take more action. It's encouraging women. It's encouraging people that want more rights. And this all is happening parallel to Jacksonian democracy. So American system, for example, that's 1816, not Jackson, right? But Jackson becomes relevant in 1824. I'm just going to throw that up there. I guess we'll put that next to common man. It becomes relevant in 1824. Whoa, sorry. And I hope everybody can see this okay. Okay, so he becomes relevant in 1824. Won't become president until 1828, obviously, because we know the corrupt bargain. Tie vote goes to the House. Henry Clay, Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams. You know the drill. Was it really corrupt? Was it not? Who knows? But anyway, the influence of the common man in politics. This brings in the spoils system. Those people who are loyal to a party, which kind of foreshadows our political machines of the Gilded Age. So you have the spoils system rewarding people who are loyal, who are supporting you, who are working to get you elected with some kind of position. So whether you know anything at all about, the Department of Interior, you might be Secretary of the Department of Interior just because you help somebody get elected. So rise of the common man, power to the people, spurs a lot of these reform movements. The other thing under culture, how did I mess this up? There we go. The other thing under culture that I forgot, speaking of uniquely American art forms, this is also going to be your Hudson River School. depicting the beauty of the landscape of America, and that's what it is. So again, helping make American culture unique. Okay. No questions so far. Okay, good. Let's see. What else do I want to say about political stuff? Oh, so some other political things that happened during this time. Not necessarily culturally, but it's antebellum, and things you do want to make sure you know. 1823 is going to be the Monroe Doctrine. And this is us kind of standing our ground with nothing to back it up, protecting those independent countries in Latin America, giving them kind of that space to become good republics. The United States said that they would support them if any European country tried to come back and recolonize. But again, our military was kind of meh at the time, so we probably wouldn't have had the ability to defend it. However, the British supported it. And the reason the British supported the Monroe Doctrine, and in fact gave us the idea for the Monroe Doctrine, is because they were essentially shut out of a lot of things going on in Latin America, especially regarding trade, because it was all Spain. And now Spain's gone, Portugal's gone. That opens up trade opportunities for the English. So they're good. So that's the politics. Another thing I wanted to mention, along with the era of good feelings, is our good friend Henry Clay shows up a lot until Civil War. And then he just, cries because we go to war. But in 1820, you remember, there's the Missouri Compromise. That sets the line. Compromise. There we go. Missouri Compromise, keeping the balance of free states, slave states, because it's starting to creep up. This era of good feelings is very precarious. So we have Missouri for Maine, even 1 for 1, but Missouri is above this 3630 line, and that is fine, but no other state above 3630 can come in as a slave state. So that was another political thing, trying to maintain this culture in antebellum society. That we need. Any questions you want to pop up there about anything? Oh, I guess thinking about dates 1819. Adams O'Neese gets us Florida, and that was Jackson saying, "Oh no, I think there's some runaway slaves. I should go there." And so he hops into Florida. Of course, there were no runaway slaves. Maybe there were a few, but that wasn't the point. Pushes the Spanish out of Florida. So it was another political issue going on in antebellum society. Oh, goodness. I'm trying to think of other things. Oh, I guess economically, if we're going to talk antebellum generally as the time period before we get into war. I'm sorry, I know if you are writing any of this down, I'm messing you up here. Economics. Jacksonian democracy is one thing, but so is Jacksonian, and I'm making this up, economics. No one calls it that, but for the sake of the read, we will. This is where you have your specie circular, which is the, you have to pay with the hard currency, and we have economic issues with that. Tariffs, nullification, which we mentioned, and there was something else I was going to mention, which I can't remember. Oh, the bus. Duh. Bank of the United States. A lot of debate over the Bank of the United States, and of course, the big thing here is the veto and the wildcat banks. That Jackson is going to funnel the money to the wildcat banks, and of course, we end up having a crisis of great proportion, because there's land speculation and the reworking of the Bank of the United States. I'm trying to find, I have notes here somewhere. Ah, panics. Okay, not to freak anybody out, but we're going to do this economic, just so you, oops, maybe my typing is what's going to freak you out. Economic crises. Sometimes it's nice to see them all together. So 1918 is panic of, oops, sorry, 1819, my brain. 1819 had an economic panic. 1837, every odd decade will have some kind of crisis. 1857, 1873. 1893. And that was in the big gold-silver debate, 1993. 1907. 1930s, all of it, as you might imagine. 1957, I don't know if Sputnik sent us into this crazy downturn, I don't know. 1973, talked about the oil embargo, bad economic time in the United States, got worse, and so now you might see why this new-ish idea of Reaganomics, well, maybe it wasn't great for everyone. It brought people's interest up because they were having such a rough time in the 1970s. And then 1991. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw in 2008. So there you go. Pretty much every odd decade there's an economic crisis. And some common things is over speculation, which I suppose is one word, speculation. Which, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's hyphenated. Over speculation, buying on credit. So buying something on credit, stocks, land, cattle, whatever it is. The bank's calling the loans, no one can pay the loans, and it's bad. One other thing, again, sorry to be sidetracked here, at the beginning of the United States, before we had, income tax, the U.S., oops, let's put this over here, U.S. money, the only way they could make money, there were two things. They had tariffs, right, the protective tariff, that's how they could generate money. Oh, the baby be crying. And land sales. So the U.S. government, remember, took on all of the land after the Articles of Confederation, right? That was one of the contingency or stipulations in getting it ratified, is that they had to give, the colonies had to give up the claim to land to their west. And so that became owned by the U.S. government, which the U.S. government would then sell, right, in their little squares. Why is my brain blanking? I don't know. 6 by 6, and then one of those squares was for education. Remember that long time ago? Land Ordinance of 1785. And so that's how the U.S. made money, tariffs, land sales. That's it. And then eventually we'll come into the income tax. But the United States kind of had its hands tied, so land speculation was a big deal. Trying to think, looking for questions. I'm going to hop back over here. Okay, I don't see any more questions, but I'm going to refresh all comments. Can I put everything I write on the Moodle? Yes, I can. I hope it makes sense. But yeah, I will put it up on the Moodle. That's absolutely fine. That's an easy question. Good. Other questions? I'm going to take a minute to breathe. Gosh, it's already 7:37. We've got to get to the progressive. Sorry for dilly-dallying. Hopefully this has all been very helpful. One thing you may want to go back and revisit is lead up to Civil War, kind of the division of the country, what events caused that friction, which we talked about a lot of those things. So review Compromise of 1850, Kansas-Nebraska Act, Dred Scott decision. We can talk about some court cases later. And I also have some elections. We talked elections last time, that you want to make sure you know big elections, things that caused a transition. You don't need to know every election, obviously, because we don't really care. But knowing those that caused a big transition in something, economics, politics, political, international affairs, all that kind of stuff. So we can go over those at a later time too, if you want. But I did say progressive era. So we got essays, antebellum, and some extra for fun. And antebellum, yeah, technically you could do Road to Civil War, but I feel like that is a different component than talking about what American culture developed into. So there's that. Okay, new page. Sorry, hit my mouse. Okay, let's talk about the progressive era. obviously the big deal about the Progressive Era is we wouldn't necessarily need the Progressive Era without the Gilded Age. If things did not get so corrupted and dirty during the Gilded Age, we wouldn't have, I would argue, but I guess people could argue either way, you wouldn't have need for the Progressive Era. So it's changing things. So if you can think of, I mean, if you had an essay one way or another, if you can think of all the bad things in the Gilded Age, you can essentially think of all the things you need to talk about in the Progressive Era. Or if you can think of all the Progressive Era changes, you can backtrack and figure out all of the things that happened in the Gilded Age to need those changes. So, oh, sorry, one other thing. We're going to back up just a second. Economics, I left out our nice ladies. We talk about the role of women in culture and that sort of thing, but don't forget the Lowell girls. And the factory workers, and you read that passage about how women were supposed to be this one way, blah, 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 but they set up this system where the unmarried girls, because, you know, oh, what are you going to do with an unmarried girl, could go work in a textile factory in the North. So that was a new model for manufacturing. Which means I also left out, I know we talked about it, but remember, canals, railroads. Railroads will be much bigger right before Civil War and after Civil War, but infrastructure in America under economics. Okay, sorry, Gilded Age. I'm sorry, Progressive Era. Legislation. That's kind of one way to think about it, what laws were brought about here. So, Pure Food and Drug. Okay, Pure Food and Drug Act, that's truth in labeling, essentially. Hopefully you saw the PowerPoint where it talked about there was, you know, cocaine and Coca-Cola and heroin and I think it was aspirin or something like that. And you had cocaine tooth drops. So anyway, there was all kinds of things in your products. And the Pure Food and Drug Act was something that was supposed to protect the consumer. So consumer protection. Consumer protection. And I'm blanking at the moment, but there were 3 C's, I believe: conservation, consumer, and I'm pulling a Rick Perry here. Oh, gracious. I'm sure someone's sitting at home thinking, yelling at the computer, this is what it is. 3 C's, Roosevelt. I'm going to quick Google because it's going to drive me crazy. Square deal. Oh, goodness. Corporations. So control of corporations. Duh. I guess I kind of associate that with protecting the consumer, but hey, alas. Why aren't you working, computer? Okay, there we go. Okay. Corporations. Okay, so that was kind of a side note, remembering that. So Teddy Roosevelt's playing the square deal, kind of making everything right for everyone, or along those lines. So Pure Food and Drug Act, truth in labeling, especially truth in labeling when we got to the Meat Inspection Act. Whoops. And of course, the Jungle, very influential. I hope you read that, and I'm sorry if you read that during lunch or around lunch. I think that was the day right after the baby. The Jungle, about all the kinds of things that were creating the special, unique taste in American meats, and why the Germans banned the importation of American meat for a while. It's because they found out how gross we were packaging meat. And the Meat Inspection Act obviously set rules and also made inspectors go to these meat packing plants to inspect the meat to make sure it's to code and we can eat it and people won't be getting sick. Also have amendments, and they don't need to be italicized. Apparently they like to be deleted. 16th Amendment, 17th Amendment, 18th Amendment, and 19th Amendment. 16th income tax, 17th direct election senators, 18th prohibition, 19th women's suffrage, woohoo, all of those things. Progressive, trying to make changes. So income tax, trying to make a little money for the government. 17th Amendment, giving more power to the people, right? So this is progressive era. Government was corrupt during the Gilded Age. The people wanted the power back in their hands. So that's 17th Amendment. 18th Amendment leads out of temperance movements, mostly by women, and they becoming more active in their quest for voting rights, and also feeling that momentum into the 18th Amendment. We have Clayton antitrust, an antitrust legislation with some teeth. You have Federal Reserve Act, which establishes the Federal Reserve, which is a quasi-independent entity that helps regulate interest rates in America. Also created the use of the dollar. So if you see on your dollar, hopefully you looked at it, it says Federal Reserve Note on your paper money, because it is a Federal Reserve Note. It is a representation of money that we accept, backed by the Federal Reserve. Blanking. I probably should have made notes for this. Silly star testing. Let's see. Progressive. People or other things you need to think about. Muckrakers. I'm going to put help for immigrants on here too, because you have political machines helping a little bit, but you're also going to have things like the Hull House, which is a specific example of a settlement house. So in Chicago, you have Jane Addams with the Hull House. There were Hull Houses in other cities, settlement houses in other cities, which would be similar to what the Hull House was trying to do. Muckrakers were journalists trying to help break the corruption both in politics and in corporations. So Ida Wells, Sinclair, Ida Tarbell. Again, people having a voice. This is a time of participation, which, if we wanted to, we could compare back to the rise of the common man. I mean, it's essentially a reform period. It makes a really nice parallel to kind of compare the two. Oh, okay. Settlement house. Okay, we'll see if we can make any other parallels while we're here. Temperance was there. The realization of women's suffrage. I don't know that there was a great religious movement. I'm trying to think. I don't know that there was. Let's think about literature and culture. I'm trying to think if there's anything like that. I mean, literature, I guess you could say the Muckrakers were literature, but I don't know about that. Let me go check to see if we got any questions on the Progressive Era. I feel like the Progressive Era is very much like conceptually a big thing, and then you can throw out some examples here. But very much, this is a time of change and what people perceive to be an improvement of the country. Oh, the one thing that's kind of, we go back under legislation, and I'm going to throw it way up here. We talked about this last time, was the Pendleton Act. And that was very, very beginnings of the Progressive Era, and that is, of course, civil service reform. Service reform. Okay. Other reforms, you could say it as a reform, is labor. And labor unions. And they struggled for a long time, but finally, in the Progressive Era, we're going to start to see the fight come to fruition. So, better hours, pay, conditions. And, for example, Henry Ford changed his hours. He also had, I think he had a playground for the kids, not the child workers, but if you had kids, there's a playground for them. He did a few other things that I'm forgetting at the moment. Did increase the pay. Obviously, that was nice because he was making lots and lots of money off the quick production of the assembly line. But that was actually, the changes the labor unions wanted were actually happening. We also see better conditions, especially because of triangle shirt. That's not right. Space. There we go. Factory fire. And all of those women that died, you know, luckily they didn't die in vain. We start to see better conditions for workers, but we also see, so this is workers and building code. Because when urbanization occurred in the Gilded Age, they're just building stuff, right, to kind of keep up with population. And they couldn't keep up with plumbing, and they couldn't keep up with taking up the trash. And so these buildings weren't stable at all. And now there was going to be more uniform building code because bad things were happening in places like that. Okay, so that's progressive. 7:50 already. Okay, let me hop over and see if we have questions. Discussion. I've got a couple people in the chat room, but no questions. That's fine. Any questions? I'm going to wait just a second, see if we get any questions. If you don't have any questions, that's fine. If you don't have questions and you want to throw another topic out there or something you want me to go more in depth on regarding the progressive era, another thing I want to throw out here, obviously, is conservation. I need to go back to the square deal here. Conservation and national parks. This is very much a domestic movement just within the United States. It's not really an international thing, except for women's rights. I would say women's rights was a global thing, more at least between the United States and Europe. If you've seen Mary Poppins, you will know that the wife of the couple, she was always fighting for women's rights, and they had the little sashes and all that good stuff. So yeah, that was a global movement. Not seeing questions or suggestions on things you want to cover. Okay, all right. Headed back over here. Oh goodness. Try to think of other things that you would want me to cover. And I'm sure I'm forgetting things. Let me scroll through the review note or the review book for just a second. Oh, the other thing. Here's a good idea. Duh, I can't believe I forgot about this. Okay, thank goodness I peeked in here. Social gospel, that's our religious movement. Taking the gospel to the people, if you will. Influence, or also dealt with temperance, right? Because they didn't want people drinking. This is the musical we had a couple years ago had the people going out into the town and trying to fix the gamblers and the alcoholics and all that business. But social gospel is religious people trying to fix essentially what they saw as social problems, like drinking and gambling and all of that business. The other thing I want to mention is that politically, I don't know if I have that on here, not so much. Politically, the populists, they had a lot of these progressive ideas back in the 1890s, and it wouldn't be until the turn of the century that they actually came to fruition. So 17th Amendment, they wanted 16th and 17th Amendments. Secret ballot. Bimetallism never happens, but that's okay. Oh, there is a question. Oh, good question. Muckrakers are the same as yellow journalists. No. They both are contemporaries of each other. They both were writing at the same time, but they had different goals. They're both, I suppose, shocking. because they were, bringing to light things that were kind of controversial. But muckrakers, kind of think of them as the people, I guess, the do-gooders, the people bringing corruption to the forefront, saying, wow, look at these things that are wrong. Jacob Riis, the photographer, he's bringing to, like, look at the condition that these poor people are living in, the immigrants coming in, look at their condition, and trying to bring about change. That's what a muckraker, I would say, is. I'm going to show you what is not good about society. How can we make it better? So bringing to light things to make change. The yellow journalists are, for lack of a better term here, greedy, all about money. They want to sell newspapers. They're essentially the tabloid people. So if they wrote, Teddy Roosevelt has a third arm, and tried to get a picture of it and would do that because, people will buy newspapers. That was their MO. That was what they wanted to do. So like with the Spanish-American War, with the USS Maine, that wasn't even an attack by the Spanish. That was, we blew up our own boiler room in our own ship. But nobody knew that, and most people didn't know that at the time. But they said, well, get me that picture, and I'm going to sell it as Spain attacks America. And I'm going to make so much money off these newspapers. And so that's the difference between the two. They're both journalists, but with very different purposes. So I hope that clarifies. That's a really good question. Excuse me. Other questions? Well, I think of some other things.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, for the sake of just making sure we all know about this, since the election of 1812 is about progressive, or 1912 is about progressives, let's talk about that very briefly, because that is an influential election and it covers progressives, so it's two important things you need to know. So we have the Republican, Democratic candidate. You have a bull moose. That's a progressive party. And then you have that socialist. So the Republican was Taft, and Taft was dollar diplomacy, if you remember, business influences, and when Roosevelt was done with his 2 terms, he said, oh, Taft will be the best replacement, isn't that wonderful? So Taft takes over for 1 term, and Taft previously had been the governor of the Philippines when the United States was controlling the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. So that's kind of Taft's background. Eventually, after he's president, he will be the only president to be a Supreme Court justice. Fun trivia that I'm sure you want to know on Thursday night. The Democrat, of course, was Woodrow Wilson. Bull Moose was Roosevelt. And this is kind of where the drama is. Roosevelt. And this is Teddy Roosevelt, TR. Teddy Roosevelt didn't really like where Taft was going. Teddy Roosevelt became very progressive because, as you mentioned before, the consumer protection, the 3 C's square deal, he wanted change in America. And so he thought that what Taft was doing wasn't necessarily what he thought he would do as his successor. And so Teddy Roosevelt, a very popular candidate, as you might imagine, comes up as a third-party candidate under the progressive Bull Moose party. And as you would guess, Roosevelt and Taft have similar ideas, more similar than Wilson to either of the two. Oh, and then Debs. Sorry, I forgot about Debs. Poor Debs. Running for office from prison later, but this time he's out and about. So Taft and Roosevelt have very similar views, and so when the election comes, Teddy Roosevelt takes many votes away from Taft, enough that splits the Republican vote, leaving Wilson as the clear winner. And so that's the importance of the election of 1912. You have a progressive candidate splitting the Republican vote and making Wilson the winner. So influence of third-party politics is very important in this one. Interesting fact, Wilson was not for women's suffrage, but Roosevelt was. So it didn't really matter, though, right? Because who couldn't vote in 1912? So anyway. So there's that. Okay, it is just about 8 o'clock. And again, I have somehow missed eating dinner. So I will give you a second to write questions or things you want me to clarify. And I'll do that. So I'll give you just a minute or so to do that. And then we'll wrap up for the evening. All right, so we're back. Do we have more questions? Let me go check it out. I went to grab a baby while you're writing questions. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Michael. Technology. So this is where we post questions. Sure, you can post it there. You can post it on the discussion side or discussion tab on the YouTube channel. Either place is fine with me. Whatever works best for you guys. Just trying to keep it nice and easy. Bailey's got a question. What would you say the most important legislation in the progressive era? Oh my. That's a really tough question. Most important. You know, I don't know. Let me go back and look at our little list and see if I can make a good decision. Oh, the baby is bald. Yes, he's bald. He doesn't have any hair. Most important. Well, I mean, I guess you might be able to say, I mean, if you're making an argument, well, here's another thing. If somebody asks you a question of similar, you know, there's no right answer really on the AP test, and back it up with something. So you could argue, and I could go with this, that the Pendleton Act is the most important because it started it. It broke the cycle of the spoils system and corrupt politics and started people speaking out. So you could say it's important because it's at the beginning, and that if you reform politics, you are able to pass these other laws that come up later on. So that's a good answer that you could believe. I think that's a good answer. The rest of them, I mean, they all do so many different things that there's not really one overarching one. I mean, the senator thing, I suppose, is a good thing because that really gives control back to the people from the political machines as well, because you're not getting all your buddies at the state legislature to nominate you for Senate. It actually goes to the people. But again, you could pull that all back to the Pendleton Act starting the civil service reform. So there's an answer. Will we have multiple choice questions over the 90s and 2000s? Absolutely. We sure will. And in talking with the students last year, granted I don't know any of the questions, but they said they were surprised that there were more questions than they thought from the early time period, or the more recent time period. So that, for whatever that's worth, who knows year to year, but they are eligible for test questions. So if we need some more review on that, we can figure that out too, maybe for next week, right before the test. We'll just cram it all in. And then hopefully you're very comfortable with the Cold War. I started grading the ID test. We have a few things to clarify next week with everybody, so I'll kind of hold off on that, but hopefully you feel comfortable with that. Just no essays. Yes, as far as I know, there shouldn't be anything specific to, it wouldn't be like evaluate the foreign policies of Ronald Reagan, Eisenhower, and George W. Bush. There shouldn't be a specific component that would require you to know things from that era to write in your essay. But if you wanted to say, you know, Ronald Reagan, oh goodness, how do I say? I don't know. I've kind of lost my thought here. Ronald Reagan and the Iran hostage crisis also affects how we deal with Iran today and the embargoes that we just recently put in. You can always include extra information. That's not going to be a problem, but it shouldn't be something you have to study. Okay. Oh, the baby's staring at you. That's so cute. He doesn't know what he's doing, but he's very sweet. Okay. Other questions? I'll go back over here to the YouTube channel. Oops. Doesn't look like we have any more questions. I'm refreshing. Loading, loading, loading. Oh, can I go over World War I? Yes, I sure can. World War I in 5 minutes or less, right? So World War I, you have the causes of World War I internationally: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And essentially you have groups of countries together in Europe that promised each other they would go to war for each other, and then one actually does go to war, so now they're either excellent friends or terrible people if they don't go to war. So they feel obligated to go to war. They all start fighting each other because, what's his name? Gavrilo Princip assassinates the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, and so everybody starts going to war to back each other up. And because Europe had been, you know, preparing essentially for war, even though they weren't going to go to war, they had all this technology and they were excited to use it, and just, I guess, parallel that to when we had the atomic bomb. And one of the reasons we used it was because why not? We had this great powerful weapon. We didn't really know what it could do, but we thought it could help us win. So similar ideas going on in Europe. So Europe fights. You have your two sides, your Central Powers, your Allied powers. Stalemate, lots and lots of death, really bad. The United States is neutral. We want anything to do with that. We are reforming at home, right, because the progressive era is happening, fighting for women's rights, all that stuff. And then the Germans sink the Lusitania, and we're like, Germany, that was not a good move. You shouldn't do that. Germany says, all right, fine, you win. We won't do it. Then Germany goes and sends the message, Zimmerman telegram, to Mexico a few years later saying, hey, why don't you invade the United States? That would be great. We'll give you back. We'll make sure you get back all of the land that they took from you in the Mexican War. Well, Britain finds out about it, holds on to the information, then gives it to the United States at a very convenient time when they think we will actually take action, because about the same time, Germany was resuming its unrestricted submarine warfare, just shooting down everything, like passenger ships like the Lusitania. And so it took the combination of the Zimmerman telegram and the unrestricted submarine warfare that Wilson's like, we can't, you know, let Germany get away with this anymore. And so they go to war. Yay! And the United States comes in and helps everybody, and people you may need to know are Pershing. Hopefully not any battles. The more important thing is what came out of it, which is Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and the hope of world peace. And that doesn't happen. We don't join the League of Nations because it threatens our sovereignty. Because we would then have to go to war just like the people in Europe did. So there's that. Treaty of Versailles ends it, blames Germany, puts Germany in a terrible economic position. Lots of debt. I hope that covers World War I. questions about World War I? Oh, at home, don't forget there were bonds and rationing to help support the soldiers over that were fighting. I'm trying to think other domestic. Oh, and then fun facts. You know, we didn't speak German anymore in schools. They didn't teach it because they thought it was terrible. Sauerkraut was called Liberty cabbage. I think Liberty steak was what a hamburger was called. So people tried to not use any German words if they could help it. Okay, so there was a question about World War I. Let me refresh. See if there's any other. World War I. Let me go scroll back up here. Oh, will I save the Word document to the Moodle? Yes. Aw, thanks. My baby's a future stud. Well, hopefully not too many ladies. Oh, thank you. We look similar. Good. Any other questions not related to the baby? Oh, because he's getting tired too. Any other questions? Okay, it's about 8:10, so that puts us at an hour exactly. Fantastic. Oh, wait, another question popped up. Oh, let me go over here. So, is United Nations from the League of Nations? Good question. Think of League of Nations as the trial run. So, they're very similar in concept. The idea is the same. A body of countries that can get together and discuss their issues, problems, and if a problem does arise, a way to solve it. So League of Nations was the attempt one, but failed miserably because, well, nobody thought it had any authority, it had no backbone, and the United States, which turned out to be one of the biggest powers in the world after World War I, they didn't join. So it loses a lot of credibility when the guy who suggests it doesn't join. So another name related to this would be Henry Cabot Lodge, who was the leader of the opposition to the U.S. joining the League of Nations. Oh, squirmy baby. Okay. What will appear on the A-push test period-wise? Can you rephrase, like, as far as eras? Like, what time periods? If that's the question, then it's Columbus to now, essentially. So Native Americans, exploration of the United States, all the way through yesterday, which hopefully they won't test you on, you know, what's going on with the United States and Ukraine. But I think that's your question. Oh, no. I hope that's the question. Hey, say it's time to eat? Well, you don't get to eat, but Mom could eat, right? Who is Henry Cabot? Henry Cabot Lodge was on the Star? Which I'm not allowed to know. Not reading. But Henry Cabot Lodge was a senator. He was for the strength of America. He liked, you know, he wanted a strong navy, military, all that business. But he didn't want the United States to be obligated to go to war just because they were part of this League of Nations. And, you know, so if France bad-talked, you know, the Queen of England and said she had an ugly hat, if the United States was allied with England, if we were allied with England, we'd have to go to war because somebody bad-mouthed the Queen. That would be silly. So we didn't want to lose our sovereignty as a nation. Yeah, he does have all the answers. Okay, other questions? Oh my, here. Do you have any ideas? Any other questions? Let's see. All right, I'll take one more question if there is one. Otherwise, oh my, we're getting out of here. Oh my. All right. Well, it sounds like we might be done because I don't see any more questions. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have more questions between now and Wednesday, of course, you know where to find me. Oh dear. All right. So, have a lovely evening, everyone. Have a great Friday. Good luck tomorrow for your AP testing in English. Oh my. All right. See you later.